Hello, colleagues. My name is DJ and I am the Events and Grants Administration Officer at NADA. I want to thank you for standing by and welcome you to the webinar, Access and Equity, Barriers and Enablers Associated with Access and Equity in AOD Treatment in New South Wales. All participants joining the webinar today are in a listen and view only mode. After the presentation, there will be a question and answer session, and you can submit a question at any time during the webinar. To do so, please type your question into the Q&A box located at the bottom center of your Zoom screen. You may need to move your cursor or tap your touchscreen device to see it. This webinar is being recorded today and will be available for viewing on the NADA website in the coming days. It's a pleasure to now hand you over to the host of today's webinar, NADA's Clinical Director, Dr. Susie Hudson. Thank you, Susie. Please go ahead.
Thanks so much. So welcome today. Thanks so much for joining us. Today's webinar is indeed on access and equity. And it started as a bit of an idea from a panel we did a couple of years ago at the last NADA conference. And we had a range of speakers really touching on some of the issues that perhaps they have experienced themselves or workers in the field have known about that can really pose issues for clients accessing drug and alcohol treatment. And more importantly, the types of strategies and ways of working that encourage and help improve access and equity. Before we go much further, I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land on which you are on, and certainly where we are here at the NADA office, and to pay my respects to the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to include that respect to elders past, present, and to future generations. We know that there's a lot to learn, both from our Aboriginal clients, consumers, and working colleagues. And so this is really a beginning. We decided from that initial panel around wanting to unearth some of those issues around access and equity, that we should take it one step further and commission some research. And I welcome now my very good colleague and friend, Joanne Bryant, Associate Professor at the Centre for Social Research and Health. And it was her team and herself who engaged this piece of really important research, and she will be talking with you about this today, but also to let you know that this begins a big piece of work for NADA to support its members in providing really good and improved and enhanced practices to improve those experiences of access and equity. And certainly the NADA Practice Leadership Group is absolutely focused on this as an area of work. So please ensure that you stay tuned for some of the resources and supports that we intend to put in place in the coming time. I'm going to hand over now to Associate Professor Joanne Bryant, and she will take you through the findings of this important piece of research. Thanks so much, Joanne.
Thanks, Susie. Thanks for joining us today, and welcome to my home office. I'm sure many of you are in your home offices too. This is where I've been for the last 5 months. So I've done a careful look around to make sure that there's no coffee cups or stuff like that. I'm going to start by acknowledging that we're on Aboriginal land as well. And I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm on today, which is the country of the Camaragal people. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and acknowledge their important role as keepers of community knowledge and spirit. So today I'm going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen with you now. There we go. So I'm going to talk about this research that Susie has just told you a bit about. It was conducted by myself and my colleagues at the Centre for Social Research and Health and the Social Policy Research Centre. And as Susie mentioned, NADA commissioned us to look at the barriers and enablers to treatment access in New South Wales. And we wanted to take a strengths-based approach with this work to focus on what works with treatment access or at least what seemed to work by the participants that we talked to in our research. We wanted to look at what maximizes positive treatment outcomes and what makes these positive outcomes more equitably available to everybody. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about how we approached the project. We decided we wanted to look at enablers across 3 parts of the treatment journey, because we expected that what works to support people in one stage of a treatment journey might be different to what works at other stages. So we divided our research questions and our approach up into these 3 stages, I guess. The pre-treatment stage, where we ask questions about what supports clients' pathways to treatment entry. The treatment stage, so those factors that help sustain engagement in treatment, and then the post-treatment phase, what supports the maintenance of the outcomes that people achieved during their treatment. And then running through all of this, we wanted to ask this overarching question: how do issues of equity impact each of these periods? And where is inequity revealed most? So we used a qualitative approach in our research, and this is, qualitative research is kind of unusual in this area. This area is really quite dominated by clinical or psychological or epidemiological styles of research. So we conducted 35 interviews in total, 20 with clients of drug and alcohol services in New South Wales, and these drug and alcohol services were located in regional and metropolitan areas. And also interviews with 15 sector stakeholders. So those included staff who worked face-to-face in treatment settings, and also management staff, and then other staff of advocacy and peak organizations, for example. So this is the profile of the 20 clients that we interviewed. And there's one important thing that I want to show you here, which is that most of the clients had experienced fairly substantial treatment experiences in the past. So we had 85%, or 17 out of our 20, say that they had entered treatment 3 or more times in the past. And so this means that they were quite a good group for us to talk to for our purposes, because they were able to talk about a range of treatment models that they've experienced, and also the different entry pathways that they'd taken, and the different perhaps post-treatment experiences they'd had. So let's get started and look at some of the themes that came out in relation to this first part of the journey, which looked at the key things that were thought to support clients' pathways to treatment entry. And this is the list of themes that were reported to us. People told us that having detailed information available to them helped them make decisions about treatment. Short waiting lists were often identified as key in helping with treatment entry. Flexible, warm, and welcoming intake procedures. Families or other support networks often helped get people into treatment, and then prior experience in the system also smoothed the way for treatment access. So I'm going to talk about the first 2 of these in a bit more detail. So when we ask clients what helped them to navigate their way into treatment, some told us that having easily accessible and detailed information helped them. So clients talked about Googling, or they talked about ringing around to figure out what treatment service suited them best. And they also told us what they looked for, what they searched for when they went online or they rung around. So for example, some wanted to know about smoking rules, or other rules, and Henry says in some of these quotes listed here, you can see Henry says that he was concerned about the regimented way of life at some services, and how he wanted to avoid that. So getting information about treatment services helped clients to build some expectations about what treatment would be like, and it assisted with their personal assessments about what they think that they could tolerate during treatment, including, for example, whether they could go without smoking. So this suggests that increasing and standardizing the information available about treatment services can work to increase clients' choice. It can work to increase their self-determination. It supports them to choose a service or a treatment model that best aligns with their preferences and circumstances. So some of the most positive treatment entry experiences were those when there were short waiting lists, or when a person had some help and support to help them during the waiting period. So Sonia talked about this. She was a senior manager at a treatment service, and she identified how the lack of places meant that people needed to actively pursue treatment entry. For example, by phoning at certain times, and that this created situations where people needed to constantly demonstrate their motivation or their readiness. The data also showed that this competition for places created inequity, because some clients had support during this waiting period and other clients didn't. And Susie talks about this. She described how a relative organized a treatment place for her, whereas other clients described how they had to manage treatment entry at times of crisis in their lives. So when they were homeless, or they were quite unwell, or they had no family and friends to support them. So waiting lists are a feature of the system that exacerbates inequity, and that's probably not news to very many people. Our data suggests that one of the ways to address this would be to provide better pre-entry support to clients, especially those who don't have family or friends to support them. And we suggest that this pre-entry support might be provided by extending existing peer support programs. And I'll say a bit more about that next. So in this next part, we wanted to know what worked to keep people engaged in treatment. And people had a lot to say about this. This is quite a highly researched area. So people have thought about this stuff quite a lot. And I've listed the main things that came out of our data here. I'm just going to talk about two of these again. The first is related to this thing that I've just talked about, which is the way that supportive relationships between clients was seen as a major enabling factor for keeping people engaged in treatment. And then also the value of clean and comfortable physical surroundings was identified by some as helpful in keeping people engaged. I'll say a bit more about that in a second. So many clients talked about the value of the relationships that they formed with others during treatment, and how these relationships were crucial to helping people to continue staying on. And these relationships were important because they set up a sort of mutual obligation between clients to stay in treatment. And the most successful services were seen to be those where staff worked to actively create these kinds of relationships as a way to maximize the therapeutic impact. So these sorts of supportive peer relationships came up again in the next bit of data that I'll show you, which is about post-treatment period, which shows the power that these relationships can have in creating positive experiences for people. And because of this, we need to think more about what role can be made for peer support in the pre-treatment period as a form of pre-entry support. If peer relationships are impactful during and after treatment, then there's surely a role for peer support in improving entry pathways where inequity is quite pronounced. So I just want to talk very quickly about this as one of the factors that was identified by clients as an enabling engagement in treatment, and that's the role of physical surroundings. And this one didn't come up very often, and it's actually not identified much in the research either. So it's minor in relation to some of these other things that I've talked about, including the strength of peer relationships. But I want to mention it because I think it doesn't get enough attention, or it seemed to be a bit superficial, but it can actually be very meaningful to clients. Because the quality of physical surroundings sends important messages to clients about their role in the service and their relationship with the service. A poorly fit out or disorderly or unclean environment reinforces existing deficit views that some clients can hold of themselves as being unworthy or undeserving. So I'm going to move on now to the final component of the data, which focused on the post-treatment period and what works, what our participants saw to work in the post-treatment period. And there was a general sense among clients and participants in general that clients' post-treatment needs were not well supported, and that the availability and quality of post-treatment care was patchy. And to give you an idea of the patchiness, some clients described very poor post-treatment care where they were provided not much more than a bit of information about where to get treatment elsewhere if they needed it. Whereas other clients were connected to aftercare services by their treating facility when they first arrived in treatment. So within this variety of experience, there's a few main factors that were reported to be helpful. And I'm going to talk about these two. So this first one came out quite strongly, and it was that post-treatment outcomes are best supported by maintaining positive social connections. And this could be with peers through 12-step programs or with staff such as caseworkers. In both situations, setting these connections up early in the treatment period was seen to be important in bringing the best outcomes, so that the positive relationship was set up early and it could endure upon treatment exit. So again, peer support is seen to play an important role. Clients value the support of people who have shared experience, and strong peer relationships set up, again, this mutual obligation between people to maintain their positive outcomes. So one of the other key things that we heard about this post-treatment phase was this belief that clients needed to have the right set of personal skills, and it was these skills that enabled people to maintain their positive outcomes. So Rhonda talks about this feature a bit, when she says, it's a good, well-rounded program, so when we get out, we can continue to do yoga or going to the gym or things like that. It's fair, she says, I think it's fairly easy to get help if you want it. You got to want it for it to work. And she really valued these skills, these individual personal skills, and she saw them as being helpful in managing her future substance use. And the skills that were seen to be needed were about communication and self-care, self-motivation, and help-seeking. But one of the consequences of the emphasis on personal skill building is identified by Carl in his quote here, where he says, there are some clients, if they kind of relapse, they see it as a failure. They don't want to inform us. So that's another factor, I think. Sometimes they drop off and they don't stay in contact. So the emphasis on personal skill building can mean that poorer treatment outcomes or poorer post-treatment outcomes can be construed as a failure of personal motivation rather than as a problem with the opportunities and resources available to clients. And this is quite important because clients can blame themselves, as Carl identified, for their relapse, which further entrenches deficit views that some already hold about themselves and results in actions to cut off what might be their only source of formal help. As Carl says, they drop off and they don't stay in contact. So just heading into the last few slides, overall the findings suggest that inequity seems to be most pronounced in the treatment entry stage when clients are navigating their referral pathways. While some clients had family or friends that helped to organize treatment entry or sometimes paid for their treatment, other clients got into treatment only through the intervention of health or social services or police. our observations also suggest that post-treatment care was patchy and depended on the type and quality of treatment service that the client was leaving. So while some clients were connected to post-treatment care during their stay in treatment, others had to organize for this for themselves, or they exited treatment with not much support in place. So just to finish up, we compiled a fairly substantial list of recommendations or things for service providers and policymakers to think about. And those are available in our full report and also in a research summary that I'll show you in a sec. And I just want to focus on a couple of them here. Probably the most compelling theme to come out of the research was the importance of the role of supportive peer relationships. And this came up during the treatment phase and then also in the post-treatment stage. And suggests we should think more about how to strengthen the role of people with lived experience in the pre-treatment stage. And we wonder if the options to boost the contributions of people with lived experience are to add outreach to existing consumer participation programs, and also to increase the range of peer support models in the post-treatment period. And then finally, we wonder if there are ways to reduce the overemphasis on individual skill building as a driver of treatment outcomes. And that's because this approach can entrench stigmatizing views that clients can be difficult and that they're sometimes unable to be helped. And instead, we might look to further explore system level changes that will better support the broader social challenges that are part of clients' so-called relapse experiences. So just to finish, these are the two outputs from the project. On the left, there is a research summary. This is a 6-page document that skims over the top of what are the main findings of the project. And then on the right is the full report, and that's about a 60-page document that and that includes a substantial literature review at the end of it, written by Robin Horwitz. So that's the end of my presentation. I am really happy to take questions now, and you can enter those questions into the Q&A box. I'll just bring up, there are a couple of questions already here. Is it possible to get a copy of the slides? Yes, I can do that. I can send those to Susie, if that's all right. And they can be available perhaps on the NADA website, or however Susie might want to distribute them. And then there's a question from Raquel. I'm wondering, how were the research participants recruited? Yeah, that's a good question, and that matters a lot to what sort of interpretation we can put to the data. So they were recruited through 5 separate treatment services in New South Wales. 3 of those were located in metropolitan Sydney, and 2 were located in regional parts of the state. And we also purposely went to a variety of treatment services in order to capture the range of experiences that we might hear through those different services. But you'll see from the findings that people did tend to talk about, well, people had a lot of different experience with treatment in the past, but they did tend to talk about particular models of treatment. And so there aren't any more questions, unless anybody would like to ask one last question. So I think there are no more questions. I'm really happy to answer any questions by email. My email is available in both of these documents actually that I just showed you. So I'm really happy to answer any questions in that way if any come up a bit later on. But I think if we are happy to finish, if there aren't any more questions, then I'm really happy to do that too. So thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Joanne. We really appreciate it. And stay tuned, everyone. All of those reports, as Joanne indicated, are on the website. And now that she's happy for them to also be included with slides, we'll do that as well. And this will inform a whole lot of work to support members and their clients in improving access and equity. Thanks a lot.